What up? OCD Chronicles, episode 2. Completely going off the cuff on these. I'm just talking about whatever I feel like talking about OCD that day. So, I wanted to talk about OCD treatment. I did do several sessions outpatient from the OCD Institute of New England, through which I was exposed to ERP, exposure response prevention, right? So ERP, for example, one of the thoughts I was having over and over is sort of a sense of, or what would be classified as existential OCD. Am I real? Is life real? Is everything around me real? What is reality? Definitely not my favorite theme of OCD. It's funny because once I got latched onto that theme, I was just like, wow, I wish I could go back to obsessively and compulsively thinking, is the stove on, and checking the stove, right? So there's certain themes, and obviously the reason that you get obsessed and compulsed is because you have a certain thought or feeling, and that thought or feeling is frightening to you, right? So anyways, on the topic of existential OCD, right, there would be, I'd do what they told me to do, which was like throughout the day, kind of mark when you're having this thought so that they could figure out if there's anything that's triggering that thought, right? If it seems a little bit more random, if there's a pattern to it. And then your response to that thought, like if there was any compulsion, and then you'd write scripts on that. So I probably have some scripts in my phone still based on some of these existential themes that I was stuck on. But just as a very basic example, right, responding in my head when that thought would come up, maybe let's say, what if I'm not real? Maybe I'm real, maybe I'm not real, right? And then you'd write scripts similar to that sentence so that the subconscious mind, you could read it before bed or even throughout the day, gets used to uncertainty. So yeah, that's basically it, right? And below that, right, when my therapist would talk to me kind of about peeling back the layers of what the core fear was, right? So what was my real fear beneath these obsessive thoughts about reality? And ultimately, where we kind of landed at that time is it scared me, It scares me to think that none of this is real, because I tend to have this obsession with getting to the truth of things, making sure that I'm very moral, right? This is coming more so when I was younger, looking back of what is the truth? Asking why when I was little, having a lot of curiosity. And I think when it comes to the thought of, is anything real? Am I real? It scares me because the answers to existential questions are debatable, right? There's different theories, philosophies, and beliefs around the nature of reality. And yes, there is quantum physics and so forth and science that says hey, this is the nature of reality. But those are also very difficult to grasp, especially when you never really question it. For example, as well, for the majority of my life, I really rebelled against religion because of the way that I was exposed to it. And I kind of just cut it off entirely versus being okay, this sits with me, this doesn't sit with me. I went to Catholic CCD, did communion, did confirmation, all that jazz. But anyways, I got really turned off from religion the way it was taught. And so I basically rebelled against the idea that there was any form of God and I was going to die and that was it. I was just going to cease to exist. So around the time that I had this thought, is life real? What's real? And scared the shit out of me because I'd never had that thought before. I never questioned the nature of reality. And it made me feel crazy. There was the layer of judgment on it of I must be crazy for thinking about this. And of course, my therapist is like, people have this thought about what is real. And I'm like, well, I never had this thought, or at least in conscious awareness, I didn't have this thought, right? I'm like, I must be sick. I must be ill. So anyways, I rebelled against religion, and I thought that when I die, I just like go black and that's it. I cease to exist in this form. And then as I started to, which is why I probably latched onto these themes, I started to get into spirituality. At the time, I started like having a very severe experience of OCD. And it's interesting because I've not spoken really, but there was a gentleman on Instagram I used to follow that said that his experiences of OCD really led him to awaken and like entertain and get involved in spirituality. So that's interesting, right? But anyway, we would do these scripts. I like thought I would just go into the whole buried, dead, that's it. And then I started entertaining like more spiritual concepts. And I'm like, okay, like if I'm energy and I'm conscious, if I'm part of like this in the universe, like, and I'm energy, then when I die, I don't just die, like I carry on in some energetic form. And like my mind is already like, because like literally I had not entertained that because I was very anti-religion because of my experience. My family did not expose me to religion really from their own perspectives. Like we don't talk about God, we don't talk about religion in our household growing up. We definitely didn't talk about spirituality, and there is a huge fear of death in my family and my father and so forth. So really, we didn't talk about any of that. So like my young brain and my through adulthood, like didn't have any exposure to this, except for like in college, I actually started studying theology. And one of my professors was like, you should really consider theology as part of your profession because you're really good at this. So like, I definitely had this this interest in it. Right. So anyways, I have that thought. I just think, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know anything. Like the nature of reality is wild. And I was so bodily fucked up at the time, meaning like my nervous system was in disarray. I was working a ton of hours. I wasn't eating as well as I should. I was training 3 hours a day, or like doing double sessions sometime for CrossFit. I had qualified for a major competition, which left me feeling excited for about 2.5 seconds and then just depressed after that. And it kind of just went into this whole like perfect storm for spiritual awakening. And, just like a lot of people, I kind of look at it like this now, like a lot of people with chronic illness experience this, where their chronic illness, they'll say like brought them to an awakening, right? And woke them up. And that's when they get into like rewiring their subconscious, neuroplasticity, neuroscience, spirituality, right? So there's definitely a theme, a trend to this experience. But anyway, I have that thought. We do those scripts and it was helpful, but it's like, yeah, I'm still going to question the nature of reality. Like it's an intelligent question. Right. And eventually that kind of stuff, when I started getting more regulated, like that thought stopped scaring me so much. So I didn't have that same fear response. But this is why I wasn't like a big fan of the ERP. I didn't like tracking my symptoms all day. I really didn't like the scripts. They were a little bit helpful. And to each his own. Like I don't think ERP is like, oh, we shouldn't do ERP. Like I think people with OCD should experience ERP, and it's very helpful for a lot of people. But I tend towards the body. So I was like, okay, if I get my morning sunlight again, if I get outside during the day, if I take my walks, if I watch my input, am I getting protein, carbs, and fat in at my meals, eating balanced meals, because protein is responsible for helping you build neurotransmitters. Whatever you put in your gut affects your brain, right? So all this stuff, I was like, okay. And then if I do my nervous system exercises, which I used an app called NeuroFit, where does that land me, right? Because I know when my body doesn't feel the way it felt at that point when I started experiencing severe OCD, and also I'd introduced a big change in my life too, then I don't have as much rumination. I don't get stuck on these thoughts. They don't incite as much fear and then lead me to want to compulse, so on and so forth. So that's why I'm very interested in brain and body-based approaches to treat OCD. And you'll hear me talk a lot more about that in future episodes. And looking back, I did a holistic health program. They had us get our morning sunlight, watch what we were putting into our body, get daily play, daily education, just like 15 minutes of play, 15 minutes of education. I got in the sun every day because it was during the pandemic, and I was scootering to the gym, and like had time off of work, but I was still making money from unemployment. And like, so yes, like a lot of variables go into people's stress responses. And that point in my life, like it was like the happiest I'd ever been for the first time ever. Like not a lot of depression, not a lot of anxiety. And looking back, I could see when I would get into OCD states that I didn't realize were like OCD at the time. So that is why I like to operate from that perspective, because if we're looking at people with OCD and saying like, okay, their amygdala, the fear center of the brain is like maybe more sensitive or hyperactive, right? The rules are still going to apply, that we need to address the nervous system, the vagus nerve, and the neuroplasticity of the brain, your central nervous system, your brain and your spinal cord, right? And the nerves, the vagus nerve, in treating OCD. Because when I went through a neuro rewiring program as well, that used a lot of like somatic based work, eyesight looking, gazing at objects for 10 seconds, really looking at them, like what color are they? What do they really look like? Index finger and thumb, 10 seconds when a negative thought would come up to break that cycle. Before I'd lift, I'd touch the barbell for 10 seconds and really feel the ridges on the barbell and the temperature of the barbell to get back in the present moment, right? So a lot of neuroplasticity is about creating presence and awareness. And it's really difficult to have obsessions and compulsions when you start to create that inner resourcing, that inner presence, and use the body to do so and the brain to do so. So that is why I have that perspective. I don't think like you can't like talk your way out of OCD. That's why the scripts are helpful, because that you are talking, yes, and you're speaking, and your subconscious is going, okay, wow, that's a lot of uncertainty. I'm going to digest that and get used to that. But I just think that the power of the nervous system and neuroplasticity should be incorporated in treatment for OCD, because so many symptoms of the mind, the rumination, which is the worry, the feelings of anxiety, are the body's way of when you're not feeling what you need to feel, and you're not having that like neuroception of and proprioception, make sure I'm using the right word, of the body, it ruminates and worries and tries to control in a sort of maladaptive way. And then I'm also studying IFS, internal family systems, for OCD. I'm going to wrap this up here in a second, but I wanted to read this to you. This is IFS for OCD. It's very interesting so far, and I just love the perspective of incorporating IFS and parts work with nervous system and neuroplasticity work. And I'm going to start here. So literally chapter 1, your OCD is trying to protect you. I just like this because it's also creates space for compassion and curiosity for people with OCD, instead of being like, yes, I'm disordered. But in my opinion, the fear response of someone with a brain of OCD, it's having a natural response. It's just that it's not necessary. It's kind of overactive, and it's, overactive to situations. So at some point, your mind decided that certain thoughts or feelings were unsafe. Maybe you grew up in an environment where making mistakes had big consequences. So now your mind fixates on getting everything just right. Maybe you had an experience where you felt out of control, and now your mind is constantly checking, washing, or organizing to create a sense of safety. Whatever the specifics, your OCD behaviors aren't random. They're attempts to help you avoid pain, fear, or uncertainty. I'm going to skip over that. Your OCD is no different. Excuse me. The thoughts and behaviors that frustrate you the most are rooted in your mind's desire to protect you. They may be misguided, but they are not your enemy. Once you start to see OCD as a symptom of protective parts, it becomes easier to approach it with understanding. You're not broken. Your mind has been trying to protect you all along, even if it doesn't always do it in the most helpful way. That's a powerful truth to hold on to as you move forward, right? So looking at OCD as your protective part. So even going back to the nature of reality example, like that scared me because that is very unknown. It's very unpredictable. And I don't feel like I have the truth or the answer, right? So I don't feel like I have control over the situation. And for me, I definitely had like a core fear, and still working on like this deep, deep fear of feeling out of control, feeling trapped was one of them. Feeling like I can't go back, like something bad happens and it's wrong and I can't get back to where I was before. Like these are some of the like core wounds themes I started to realize were like really the core fear, the underlying fear over some of the obsessions and then compulsions that I would have. And a lot of my stuff is not just physical compulsions. A lot of it is like mental obsession followed by mentally reviewing things, mentally checking things. Yeah, so a lot of my stuff is mental too. But I'm going to dive deeper into this IFS for OCD. I'm only like 40 pages-ish in. Jeffrey Liswick is the author, and apply this to my work with clients. Again, a very compassionate, curious approach along with the work that I already do for toning the vagus nerve and different exercises for neuroplasticity that rewire the brain out of these patterns, right? Because that's what you're trying to do with OCD is you're trying to interrupt the pattern that happens very quickly, especially if you've been doing these things since you were like 5 or 6 like me, and the pattern gets wired in. You got to essentially unwire and rewire a new pattern into your brain, right? So getting the nervous system to a more flexible state. Because again, it's like someone could have the same thought as me, but they won't have that same fear response. So maybe they're more flexible in their nervous system. Maybe they're more regulated in their nervous system. Maybe their brain isn't quite wired for fear like mine is, right? But there's still the possibility that I create some space and rewire the brain to not have that same fear response. So yeah, I'm going to dive deeper into that in future episodes, but for anyone struggling with like existential OCD, that theme, it can be really rough, but I also think it's like one of the ultimate themes to test progress, because unlike the stove example where even though your mind is doubting it in OCD, you can clearly see that the stove is off. The existential themes do not have that clear distinction. And even the therapist was like, this is really a tough theme. And she's like, it's actually not very common. I was like, oh, gee, thanks. Here I am. Another reason here to make me feel like I'm a weirdo. But yeah, I think it's a tough theme to grapple with. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there for now. That was way longer than I anticipated, but I'm just talking and chilling with you guys, and hopefully you feel seen by these videos that I'm doing.